Hey, this is Will. So all of the costs I've seen online about Sri Lanka, all of that information for some reason seems to be false, and everyone that I met in Sri Lanka, everyone told me that they are very confused why all of the information out there is saying one thing, but when you actually come to Sri Lanka, it is very different. So I will try and tell you exactly what you can expect, and really I have not seen this anywhere online, and I will explain all of the different aspects when it comes to accommodation, co-working, food, transportation, so on and so forth. By the way, I do have some amazing freebies, so make sure to check out all of the links in the description and also follow me on my social media. Now let's jump into it. All right, so the first thing is food, and this is where the misconceptions start. And I do have to say, by the way, before I get into this, currently the situation in Sri Lanka is very interesting. So the currency has drastically dropped in value. So just a couple weeks ago, basically for $1 you would get 200 Sri Lankan rupees, whereas now it's 300 Sri Lankan rupees. So the currency has devaluated a lot, and it might keep on growing, or well, declining. So the prices obviously have been adjusting, and I think this is still going to give you good ballpark of what to expect, but keep in mind that things are adjusting a little bit now. So what I've noticed as well, by the way, is that a lot of, let's say, Western places, a lot of touristy places, they already adjusted their prices somewhat. So some of them actually adjusted, so it's basically exactly the same as it was before in terms of, let's say, USD. But some of the places that adjusted, things became a little bit cheaper, and some of the local places, they actually haven't adjusted yet. But I do think that over time, all of the places are going to adjust a little bit, so they're going to increase their prices in the local currency, but still it's going to be maybe a bit cheaper than it was before this recording, like a month before this. So okay, so the first big misconception. So on all of the websites before coming to Sri Lanka, I read that you can get a local Sri Lankan dish, a curry or kottu, for basically $1, $2. And honestly, I still haven't found a place where you can do that. I haven't been really looking per se, but I haven't just noticed it anywhere. And I do know that some locals, they go to specific places where you can do a takeaway, and there you only pay maybe $1 or $2. But for most of the places that you're probably going to go to, most of restaurants, whether it's more touristy restaurant or actually just a regular restaurant, it seems to be very different. So usually, as I said, a dish would be somewhere between 1,200, maybe 400 rupees, and I would say sort of nice medium restaurant, but sometimes even a little bit more simple restaurants. So that in USD is $6 to $7. And as I said, the currency just dropped a lot. So I would say, even though people are going to probably adjust some prices, I would say expect to pay somewhere around between $5 to $7 for a local dish. So that is quite a bit more in comparison to just paying a couple dollars. That's triple the price basically. And I do have to say, the food is absolutely amazing. I mean, the local food, and they give you a lot of food, so the portions are really big. I do fasting, and honestly for me, because of the fasting, I guess I can't eat like big and huge portions, so I barely actually even managed to finish one. So it is a lot of food, but still it's way more expensive than I've read anywhere else. And you can find some cheaper options, some really local restaurants the food is not going to be maybe sometimes as good there, just because, let's say if you're eating curry and stuff, sometimes it's not very hot. So in there it's going to be a little cheaper, but honestly not that much. You're still probably going to pay somewhere around $4 per dish. So the interesting thing here is that because local Sri Lankan food is, I would say, in comparison to like everything else, in comparison to how much money people make here in Sri Lanka, which is really not a lot, it's pretty expensive. And because of that, Western food is actually pretty much exactly the same price. So this is the interesting thing. Pretty much anywhere I've traveled around the world, it's usually okay, you have the local food, that's the very cheap option, and then Western food is always, or not just Western food, but foreign food is always more expensive option. But here it's pretty much the same because Sri Lankan food is not that cheap. So again, you can expect pretty much the same, $5 to $7 to pay for Western food, and I would say is pretty good as well. There's a lot of places that have pretty good Western food. At the same time, Sri Lankan food is so good that I honestly usually rather go for the Sri Lankan food rather than the Western food. And there are, by the way, some cafes, some restaurants that are very, so to say, chic, very hipster, very nice restaurants and cafes, but then the prices can go up quite a bit more. So you can expect to pay, I would say, between $8 to $10 for food. So yeah, some places they would be $8 to $10 for, let's say, a burger. So that's the first thing that is very surprising. When it comes to street food, honestly, you don't have, let's say, like street stalls as you do in certain countries. You do have, as I said, there are some places that I think you can do takeaway. I haven't been quite looking for them, but haven't really seen them at the same time. You do see a lot of places that sell samosas and just little sort of snacks like that. And those snacks are absolutely, like, they are really cheap. I think you can buy a samosa for maybe 30-50 cents. When it comes to groceries I would say are pretty much the same as anywhere else in the world. I haven't really seen, when it comes to fruit, for example, the fruit is pretty cheap. I would say there's a lot of good and cheap fruit, so definitely eating a lot of fruit. When it comes to vegetables, eggs, even meat, I would say it's pretty much the same, not a huge difference. One thing about Sri Lanka though is, and I'm 99.9% sure about this, but the government from 2019, they employed a law, or maybe 2021 or 2020, whatever, like a couple of years ago, they had a law where they banished all of the products used for all of the different fertilizers and everything that is not organic to do with agriculture. So basically, technically, and I don't know how much this is true, like how much it has come into effect over the past, whatever it's been, a year, 2 years, but supposedly all of the food in Sri Lanka should be organic. It should be produced organically. So that seems very good. And honestly, when I go buy fruit and all of that, definitely it looks different. I just had conversation about this the other day. It looks different from what you get in the West. You don't have, let's say onions and tomatoes. They're not all huge. They're actually all very small and they don't have the perfect shape and all of that, but everything does taste very well. One thing I will say, that if you want obviously some Western food, it's going to be a lot more expensive when it comes to, let's say, something like bacon, or you want some nice cheese, or you want some peanut butter. All of those things, first of all, they're fairly hard to find if you're in the south, in the small towns. It's kind of difficult to find those things, and they are, once you find them or you go to Gaul or something, they are quite a bit more expensive. Next, we got accommodation. So this is another, I think, huge misconception that has been for some reason spread online, that Sri Lanka is super cheap. And I guess it depends how you look at it, because technically, yes, you can find accommodation that is really, really cheap. You can find accommodation, literally you can find, let's say, a room at a homestay that's going to be $200 a month, which is nothing. Well, I mean, okay, it's not nothing, but it's very cheap. But it really depends on the price and the value, what you actually get for that price, because that room is going to be just an old room that, okay, you can get that, but most likely it's not really a very nice option to live at. And if you want something that's more modern and a little bit nicer, it's actually going to be quite a bit more expensive. So if you really don't care where you live and you just need a roof, then yes, you can find cheap options. But if you do somewhat care and you want a nice modern place or you want nice aesthetic, first of all, it's a little bit difficult to find that. And in general, it's not that cheap. So let's say if I compare it to Southeast Asia, like Thailand or Malaysia or Philippines, all of those places definitely have much better, much cheaper accommodation in terms of the price and the value. Even I would say in Bali, you can definitely get nicer, cheaper accommodation than you can in Sri Lanka. In Sri Lanka, it's, I would say that medium, you can find a lot of sort of either very old looking places, and yes, they are pretty cheap, or you have the nice places, but they are a lot more expensive. So there isn't as much of that medium ground. Let's say if you want to get a modern house, a nice looking sort of nice aesthetic house, it's probably going to cost you at least $1,500, maybe $2,000 per month. So it really depends. And I think here, in comparison, let's say, to some places like Bali. In Bali, a lot of people rent out maybe a villa and they share with other people. So you have really nice accommodation and maybe you're just paying $500, $700 a month. Whereas in Sri Lanka, you don't really quite have that. So I think a lot of people just end up living in different hotels and just eating out. And you can have some nice hotel rooms. But again, if you want a decent hotel room, I would say it's going to cost you around maybe between, I would say, 30 to 40, probably closer to $40. Now, when it comes to transportation, you have a few different options. So if you want to sort of travel a little bit of Sri Lanka, you can get a driver, and a driver is going to cost you somewhere between $50 to $70 per day. And they're just going to, that is including gas and everything, and they're going to drive you pretty much wherever you want. The whole day, around 8 hours. There's also public transportation, so you can take trains in certain places, by the way, it depends, but up north, for example, from Colombo to Ella, Kandy, Nuwara, so on and so forth, you can take train. You also have buses, and trains and buses, they really don't cost anything. Trains cost maybe a couple dollars in between cities, and buses really cost just a few cents, maybe $1 if you're going a bit longer distance, but they're very cheap. So I do know some people do that option. By the way, if you are up north, you definitely need to take the train. You definitely need to take that's, I would say, probably the most unique experience you will experience in Sri Lanka, and definitely a must. And in the south, I do know some people going between the different cities and exploring them by just taking a bus, and that is very cheap. And the buses here as well, take the bus at least once. It's okay, there are regular buses, but there are also these buses that are sort of like party buses. They are, again, very unique. So take a bus at least one time. Other than that, usually you use tuk-tuks here, so you unfortunately don't really have Uber. They do have their local app, which is Pick Me. And you can use Uber technically, and you can use Pick Me, but unless you're in Colombo, the apps don't really work. It's very hard to get a driver. I did manage a couple of times to get some drivers, but honestly, I really wouldn't rely on using those apps. They're not really properly working. So usually you will stop a tuk-tuk on the street, and a tuk-tuk, if you're just going very short distance, then it's going to be maybe $1, $2. If you're doing a little bit longer distance, perhaps let's say you're in Ahangama, you're going to Wellingama, which is maybe a 15-20 minute ride, then that's going to cost you around $3 to $4, which again, honestly, like, it's pretty cheap But at the same time, if I would look at other countries, I would say it's not that cheap considering that it's a tuk-tuk and it's not a regular taxi. If you want to rent a scooter, again, this is one of those things that doesn't really add up for me. I don't know why. All of the countries, I've been to pretty much every country in Southeast Asia, and every country in Southeast Asia, renting a scooter would be, and sorry, I know that Sri Lanka is not part of Southeast Asia, but I'm just comparing because how much money an average person within the country makes, and it's kind of the same in Sri Lanka as it is in Southeast Asia. That's why I'm making this comparison. So usually a scooter costs between $50 to maybe $70 in, let's say, Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam, wherever. In Sri Lanka, for some reason, one day costs $7.5, and they basically, if you rent a month, they don't really give you much of a discount. So a scooter is somewhere between $150 and $200 per month. So it's triple, if not quadruple, the price of other countries. So that is quite a bit of an expense, I would say, especially compared to all of these other countries. Now, going out, going out, first of all, is a lot of fun in Sri Lanka. At least I enjoy it a lot. It's very laid back and very surfer type of vibe, so it depends what you like. They do have quite a few different parties. We're talking about, let's say, the usual entertainment, like going to cinema and all of those kind of things. It's actually, you're not really going to find that in the South, and most of the time I'm referring to the South, which is where all of the digital nomads live. You can do all of those things in Colombo. Honestly, I haven't done that, so I'm not sure. But for just going out, partying, all of that kind of stuff, imported alcohol is actually very expensive in Sri Lanka. So a lot of places actually use the local liquor, which is much cheaper. So beer that's produced in Sri Lanka, that's going to cost you, I would say, around $2 to $3 depending on the place. And if you want a cocktail, that's going to be around $5 to $7. And one thing I also noticed, which I haven't encountered actually in a long time in all of these different countries aside from Europe, is that you do have some entrance fees to go to certain parties. So the entrance fee, again, it's maybe around, usually it's $1,500, which is around $7 to enter a party. But also that's only like certain events. Most of the things you don't need to pay an entrance. Oh, one thing that does seem to be very cheap in Sri Lanka is surfing. So if you're into surfing, renting a board here is surprisingly, compared to everything else seems for some reason more expensive than other countries. But surfing is actually, renting a surfboard only costs around $1.50 per hour. And also if you want to get a private instructor, some of my friends did that, and I believe that was, I want to say, around $20 for a lesson. And a lesson, I believe, is around a couple hours if you don't get hired before that. So in comparison to all of the countries that I've been to, surfing is actually, especially if you want an instructor, I would say Sri Lanka is definitely a good place in terms of the value, and also it's an amazing place to surf in general. Next we got phone. So phone, I actually just topped up my data. So I paid around $10, and for the $10 I got around 10 gigabytes. You have this plan where you have certain data that's during the daytime and then certain data that's the nighttime data after certain hours. So I got basically around 10-15 gigs of data for around $10. And the internet is not too bad as well, by the way. The data, it's around 30 to 40 megabytes. Next we got co-working spaces. So you have a few different co-working spaces down in the south, and in general it's somewhere between $125 to $150. And they do have some of the co-working spaces, they're pretty simple, but some of them, they are actually, I would say, very nice, so not too bad of a value. Next we got gym. So gyms are very cheap. Well, I guess it depends what you compare it to. Actually, in the UK I used to pay £10 for a gym, but here it's around maybe $15-20 for the gym. But again, I haven't really found a gym in the south that would be very modern and very developed. So all of these gyms are sort of very local, and some of them they have the aircon, but the aircon pretty much honestly doesn't work. They better just open the windows. So it's super super hot to work out. I literally go to the gym at 6 a.m. just to make sure that I don't die from overheating. Other than that, also medical stuff. So first of all, obviously get an insurance. I always recommend to do that. I will leave a link of the insurance that I use. Technically, I have heard many people say that when you come to Sri Lanka, they do provide free healthcare even for tourists, but at the same time, I did have some medical issues that I needed to go to the hospital, and I did call one hospital and they basically told me that, oh, you need to be registered that you're living here, otherwise you can't really go. And at the end, I wanted, it was an important thing for me, so I wanted a very, very modern hospital. So I ended up calling a private hospital. So for private hospital, obviously you need to pay money. So do double check. If you're in public hospital, you might actually be able to do that for free, which is absolutely crazy. But also keep in mind that probably there's going to be long queues depending on what exactly you want to do. And when it comes to the private hospitals, it seemed that it's really not too bad. So I was considering getting an MRI, and MRI, well, they were saying it depends on what exactly it is, but it was basically starting from $40 to maybe $100, which is really pretty cheap price. I'm not sure about the quality per se, but price-wise, it doesn't seem like it's going to absolutely bankrupt you. So all in all, I would say that Sri Lanka for me, honestly, again, if I compare it to, so this one person that worked at a hotel, that was actually, it's a little bit crazy experience because he was a really nice guy. So I gave him a tip, which was $15. And he was so astonished that I gave him this tip. And he literally told me, he was like, this is my 2-day salary. That $15. So that means that average, basically a simple job here, you're basically making $200, maybe $250 per month. So that is pretty much the same as, let's say, Vietnam, maybe Philippines. So you would expect that the prices would be around that as well. But for some really weird reason, if you are a foreigner, you're a digital nomad, you're a tourist here, prices are a lot more expensive than in all of those Southeast Asian countries. As I said, probably it's more expensive than most of the South America as well. Again, I'm talking about everything in terms of what you get for your money, because obviously you can always live very, very cheap. But anyway, that's my opinion, that everything that I read online, I really think it's a lot more expensive. And in general, I would say what I saw online was that you can come to Sri Lanka and you can live very comfortably or live as a king for $1,000. And I think that is huge misinformation. Obviously, if you get very cheap accommodation, maybe that's possible, and if you do some cooking at home. But let's say if you eat 3 meals a day, and let's say a meal is $5, $15 per day, $450 per month roughly. Then let's say you rent a scooter, that's let's say $150 per that means $600. And then let's say you get an accommodation that's just $400. So that's just your basics, that is 1,000. And obviously, aside from that, you will want to go out, you will want to go surfing, you will want to go snorkeling, you will want to do all of the different things. So I think it's going to be very, very difficult to be here with $1,000. I would definitely not do that. I think you need at least, I would say, $1,500 if you want to sort of live comfortable. And if you want to have, if some things are very important for you, like having nice accommodation, which, I like sometimes to have, then as I said, if you want to have nice house, it's going to cost you at least $1,500, maybe $2,000, again, depending on the area. So I might have forgotten some things. If you have any questions, if you're listening to this as a podcast, take the title, put it on YouTube, find the video, and leave your questions in the comments. I'll try to answer as many of those as I can. If you think there's something additional, or maybe you think maybe I said something wrong, or you just have something else to include, then definitely leave that in the comments. The more information, the better. As I said, I have some very useful freebies, so make sure to check out all of the links in the description. Make sure to follow me on my social media. If you found this useful, make sure to smash the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, put on those notifications. Stay awesome, and I'll see you soon.